Hello everyone and welcome to the JewelleryMaker Academy. My name is Mark Smith and in today's tutorials we're going to be mixing up a little bit. Now you've looked at our tutorials all about macrame, your square knot and your half square knot, and you've also had a little look at our half hitch and double half hitch macrame workshop. Well, today we're going to mix them all together. And the other of the 5 macrame knots, the lark's head knot, is also going to play a pivotal role. So we're going to be covering all together in the same piece of jewellery, your lark's head knot, your half hitch, your double half hitch, your half square and your square knot. So as you can see, we're going to be covering a wide range of pieces of jewellery, from your simple wraparound bracelets to your more extensive necklaces, all following simple rules which we'll go through on each of the chapters. So in front of me here, I have a board with everything you're going to need to make every single piece of jewellery that you see to my left. So what have we got? We've got a beading mat, first of all, and that will stop all of our beads from rolling around that we're going to be using in the projects. Pair of scissors, very important. We're going to be doing a lot of cutting. The cords we're going to use, there are a myriad of cords available from JewelleryMaker, but my favourite is the E-Lon cord. I've always used E-Lon cord, and the reason for my using this particular cord is because it's a man-made fibre, it's nylon. You can actually cut and splice the ends using a naked flame. And when we come to do the little demonstrations in a while, I'll explain that you don't have to use the naked flame. If you'd rather, you can use jewellery glue. Now, I don't have very much patience at all, so any quick fix. So if you are using the jewellery making glue, you will need to let it set before you can finish your project completely. Whereas if you use a naked flame, it's finished there and then. So that's your way of finishing. There are cords, as I've mentioned, and we're going to be using 0.9mm gauge and 0.5. We're going to be using, in some of the projects, seed beads. And the two sizes that I generally use when I'm doing macrame are your 8/0s and your 6/0s. So the number, the 8 and the 6, are the number of beads uppermost with the hole proud in an inch. So 8/0, 8 in an inch, 6/0, 6 in an inch. So the smaller the number, the larger the bead. You'd think it'd be the other way around, but they like to confuse us. So 6/0 is the largest and 8/0 is the smaller. We will be using gemstones, and in front of me I have got 3 sizes that you will find is used in macrame generally, starting with your 4mm round, your 6mm round and your 8mm round. Then we've got this little item here. Now these are going to be invaluable in all of the projects in these tutorials, and these are your T-pins, and they're invaluable for holding cords, and we're going to be using at some point during the tutorials up to 10 cords, so it's invaluable you have your T-pins. Apart from our round gemstones, we're all going to be incorporating these. Now these are donuts. Now I'm showing you here some, we've got poppy jasper, we've got tiger's eye, we've got Vesuvianite, we've got 3 amazing donuts. You can use square donuts, you can use smaller haigus if you're going down the jade route if you want to, but any donut shaped bead we're going to be using in the projects. Now there's only one thing missing, and that is the most important tool, and that is the macrame board. Okay, there are 2 types. There's your bracelet type and there's also the necklace variety. The necklace type you can see underneath my mat here. So for all the tutorials today, I'm going to be using the smaller board. Even for making your necklaces, you can use the smaller. So without further ado, we're going to move on to project 1, which is all about, I feel, the most unutilized of all of the 5 knots, and that's the lark's head. So we're going to talk through the lark's head knot, and we're going to make a piece of jewellery using exclusively that particular knot. Hello everyone, in this chapter I'm going to be introducing you to one of my favourite and probably the most underutilised of all of the 5 macrame knots, and that's the lark's head knot. And you'll generally find that the lark's head knot is only responsible for adding cord to cord. It doesn't actually do anything very much. So I'm going to big up the lark's head knot, and I've discovered a beautiful piece of jewellery, a really simple little friendship bracelet that uses only lark's head knot, exclusively the lark's head. So it's a really good way of practicing the knot, getting to grips with it, and then you'll be able to use that later on in your other pieces of jewellery. So what I've got in front of me is I've set up my small macrame board, and I'm using one of the T-pins at the top here, and I'm attaching my cord as we've done it in the other two workshops in the Jewellery Maker Academy. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to be using two colours. So I'm going to be using a dark grey, and this is 0.9mm. We're not going to be using gemstones until the very end, so you can use a nice thick gauge. And what we're going to do is we're going to take one end, and about 7 or 8 centimetres from one end, we're just going to fold our piece of work over. And then the lark's head, all we're going to do is we're going to take that loop that I've just made, and I'm going to feed it underneath our two lazy cords. I'm going to pick up the loop, and then I'm going to feed the two ends through the loop. So I tend to fold the loop over and pull the two cords through. Now we're going to pull the longer cord as well, and then we're going to pull nice and tight. I'm just going to feed it up, probably leaving a little loop of about 1 centimetre at the top. And then what we need to do is the shorter cord, we're just going to move out of the way, so we're going to pop it in a slot at the top, so we're left with one longer cord. Then we're going to take our second colour, and we're going to do exactly the same. So we're going to go from one end. If you want to make the full bracelet, you'll need about 1 metre of each of the two colours. We're going to fold it again, about 7 or 8 centimetres. And this time I'm going to go from right to left. So I'm going to take the loop under. I'm going to hold on to the loop. I'm going to take both of the cords through the loop and pull through. So now we've got a left facing lark's head and a right facing lark's head. So I'm going to bring the two up so they meet directly above and below each other. And then once again, I'm going to take the shorter cord and I'm going to take it out of the way, and we'll dispose of those later on. So there are two ways of tying a lark's head. I've just shown you one of them, and that's using two cords. From now on, we're going to be doing the lark's head with a single cord. And this is how we do it. Well, I'm going to start with the dark cord because we want to knot over the knot below. So this is how you do a lark's head knot using one cord. So we're going to take our first cord. We're going to drape it over the centre cord, and we're going to go over and under and pull up. So that's your first half. And then your second half is we're going to go under and over and through. And then when you pull, you can now see that we've got a perfectly formed lark's head knot using one cord. So now we're going to go onto our orange side. So the first half of the knot is always over, under, so over, under and over. So we bring this to the top. And then the second half of the knot, it's under, over and under. So we're just going to do it all in reverse. So I'm going to pull that nice and tight. So then we move on to our right hand cord. So draping over the lazy. So the first side, it's over, under and over. Pull to the top, nice and tight. And the second half, it's under, over and under. So over, under, over, under, over, under, and then you'll have you can already see the knot starting to form. And the reason why we left a short tail at the top is because we're only using one strand to tie the knots. You don't want to get to the end of your work and then have a long length of cord. That'll just be a waste. So that's why we just leave a little tail at the top. So I'm going to go round, so over, under, over, pull nice and tight, and then under, over, under. It's a very simple little rule to remember, and you'll be able to produce perfect lark's head knots time after time. So over, under, over, and then under, over, under. And you have a perfect lark's head every time. So let's do a couple more, and then I'll quickly show you how we finish the bracelet. So soon you pick up a really nice little rhythm. This is one of those knots that you don't need to concentrate too much with, so you can have the TV on in the background, or you can listen to a podcast or something like that. So over, under, over, under, over, under. You can see how quickly this knot builds up your piece of work. So over, under, over, under, over, under. Now if you're using two colours like I'm doing here, I like to start with one colour and finish with the second. So I'm just going to do one more grey knot, like so, and then we'll repeat with the orange. So I started with the grey, so I like to finish with the orange. So what you would do is you would continue with this knotting combination until you are happy with the length of your completed bracelet. So we'll imagine that I've got to the end of my bracelet. So now I'm going to take everything off of the board, like so. And then what I've discovered is that I've managed to find a gemstone that has a large drill hole. These are some beautiful jadeite 6mm rounds with, as you can see, the large drill hole. So as I mentioned in the introduction, we're going to cut our threads, so all of our working threads, and you can either use the naked flame to melt the ends, in which case you can continue with your piece of work straight away, or you can just dab a little bit of glue on top of the knots, let that set, and then trim off any excess thread. So I'm just going to cut off my working cords, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a manageable length, maybe 6 inches. I'm going to feed both of my cords through the large drill hole bead. You can also use a 6/0 seed bead if you want to as well. Anything with a large drill hole, because bear in mind you're getting 2 cords through. What you can also do if you want to is use a thinner cord, your 0.5, to act as your central lazy cord running through the centre, and then you'll be able to use a smaller drill hole bead. So then all I'm going to do is just tie a simple single overhand knot, make sure it sits quite close to the gemstone. So just pull those little tails through, there we go. Make sure that's nice and tight, cut off a little end like so, and then you have plenty of scope then to fold over your bracelet, pull those little tails that you've left, and then the gemstone will pull through. So if I just bring this bracelet across and show you on the overhead. So there's our completed lark's head row. So you can see I've used the 2 alternating colours. It's great fun, you can have a real play, and especially if you've got metre and a half lengths of odds and ends of your cords left over. And then as you can see at the end, I've used the lighter, so I've got nice clean edges all the way around. I've threaded on my little gemstone, and then you use that as your little loop. So what I'd definitely recommend is choosing your gemstone stopper bead first, determining the drill hole size, which will then determine the thickness of the cord running through the centre of the bracelet, and then you can then decide on the colours of the cords you're going to make. So I think the gemstone stopper, and obviously make the stopper the same size as the loop lock that you're going to make with your completed piece of work. So this is my ode to the lark's head knot, and a very as I mentioned, a very underutilised knot. And as you can see, it's great fun, great simple knot to learn. And you'll probably be using lark's head knots now in all of the chapters from now on. So without further ado, come along and join me for the next. Welcome back everyone to chapter 3. Now, when you're making your macrame bracelets or necklaces, there are so many different ways of finishing. And I have to say, one of my favourite ways is called the loop lock ending. And it's going to be utilising the lovely lark's head knot that we've just learnt from the previous chapter. So this is a lark's head loop lock ending. So as you can see, it's a little loop made of nothing but your little lark's head knots. And then that, we're going to be making this bracelet a bit later on. So this ending here is a beautiful way of starting and finishing your work. And again, it's going to be utilising the lark's head knot. So for this, you are going to need at least 2 lazies, and then you're going to need a working strand. So for my lazy, for demonstration purposes, I've chosen black. I've got 2 lengths, And the way to measure the length of the piece of cord for your lasers is you take a piece of cord, you fold it in half, and it's got to be bracelet length. So what I tend to do is take 2 pieces of cord, each piece of cord, minimum length of your small macrame board, which is about 10 inches long, so 20 inches if you cut 2 pieces. Find the center, place the center of those 2 cords in the macrame board and hold them with your finger. And then all we're going to do is we're going to take 2 to the top and nice and tight in a slot at the top of our board, and then we're going to find the corresponding board, and the cords have to sit parallel. Okay, if you can, don't twist them or fold them over each other. And we're going to attach our cords nice and tightly, and you should be able to strum like a guitar. It should be nice and tight. For my working strand, which is the most important of the 2 cords, you will need about 4 foot in length, because you're going to be doing quite a few knots with this particular cord. Okay, and at the moment we're not adding in gemstones, this is purely a macrame piece of work. So I've got a shorter piece here for demonstration purposes, and I'm going to take both of the ends, I'm going to fold it in half, and I'm going to take the loop, I'm going to fold it underneath, take both of the sides and pull. So that is now nice and neat in the center of your work. Now we're only going to be using one of the cords to tie the knots, but we will be incorporating this cord later on, so we're just going to move that out of the way. So what we're going to do is we're going to repeat our length of lark's head knots as we did in the first chapter. So we're going to go over, under and over, making sure it's nice and secure, and then we're going to go under, over and under. So you can now see we've got 2 lark's heads together. So what I'm going to do to make sure that it stays nice and flat, I'm just going to attach that cord there. So what we need to do is depending on the size of your gemstone, now I've been using a 9-10 millimeter round, and I've worked out that you need approximately 12 of your knots. So we'll just make a few of these, and this is really nice, again, practice for your lark's head knot. So I'll go up to 10 for the demonstration, but as I said, depending on the size of the gemstone you incorporate as your stopper will determine the number of knots you need to make. And I think the colour I've chosen, this beautiful creamy ivory colour against the black, you can definitely see the knots taking shape. So under, thanks. So you will soon notice if you do make a mistake and you do 2 over, under and overs instead of 1 of each, because the knot won't sit right. So let's do a few more. What I love about making macrame bracelets and macrame jewellery is if you have any allergy to metal types, you can be guaranteed that all of the pieces of work that I've been showing you today, there's not any metal whatsoever. There are no toggle clasps, no bolt ring clasps. It's purely all cord work, which is again a beautiful reason for macrameing. So under and over. Okay, so how many have we done? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Perfect. Okay, so we've made our little section of knots. What we're going to do next is we're going to take it off of our board, and you will need a T-pin. And what we're going to do is we're just going to fold the group of knots, making sure it's nice and tight. You might need to little cinch up the knots, and we're going to fold in half, and we're going to bring both of the ends to the center. So you can now see, just flatten this out a little bit, we've got a beautiful little loop of lark's head knots. So I'm going to take one of my T-pins, and I'm just going to, we're not going to pierce through the knots, we're just going to take it to the top of the loop there. And then what I'm going to do, just move this up a little bit, is I'm going to take my black cords, which are my lasers throughout the bracelet, and I'm going to place all 4 of those cords in a slot at the bottom of the board. So just pull those nice and neatly into a slot at the bottom. Just make sure it's nice and secure, like so. And then what we're going to do, you can see now that we've got our 2 working cords on either side. So I'm going to take the left and we're going to join that loop together with 1 square knot. So I'm just going to bring it up nice and tight. So that's the first half of the square knot. And this is the second. We'll do 1 more, like so. So if I now take this off of the board, you can now see that that loop is perfectly formed. It's been tightened, it's attached to our working cords, and we're ready now to start our next piece of work. So what you would do, I've got a little piece here, little sample piece here that I've made earlier, is we've got our little loop lock at the top, and then I've done a little section of square macrame into twist, into square. And what you would do is very similar to how we finished the previous chapter, is you would, in this case I've got 4 cords, so that might be too many. So what I would do is I would trim them off, I would separate the outside edge cords and I would cut them away. So we'll cut the outside away. We're going to cut off our working cords. I'm going to do the same, just be really careful which cords you're going to be cutting off. And then either use your glue and then trim them off when they've set, or use your naked flame. And then you've got your 2 cord endings. Choose a gemstone, and again 2 pieces of 0.9. This is one of the extra large stones, and then you would knot it as we did in the previous chapter, making sure that we feed that knot down to the gemstone. There we go, perfect. And then we'll cut off our little tails just to leave enough, and there you have your loop lock. The gemstone fits nice and neatly in your loop lock. So you can see now that that's completely lark's head knot made, and then you revert back into your other macrame knot. So the title of this tutorial is going to be multi macrame knot pieces, and as you can see, we've used the lark's head knot, we've used a half square knot, and we've used a full square knot. So in that tiny little piece of section there, which will eventually become a full piece of work, we've used 3 of the 5 knots. Okay, so that's that chapter. In the next chapter, we're going to move on, and we're going to be incorporating the lark's head knot with your half hitch and your double half hitch. So come along and join me for that. Welcome back to chapter 4. Now, we were talking about the lark's head knot earlier being a very underutilised knot, and I feel in the gemstone world, the gemstone donut also is a very underused type of stone. And as you can see from some of the pieces to my left here, they are so versatile, and you can attach multi-cords, you can really embellish, you can bring your gemstones to life just from adding a simple focal bead as your gemstone donut. So in front of me here, I've got a various range. I've got, as we mentioned earlier, I've got poppy jasper, I've got some tiger's eye, we've got some chrysoprase, we've got jadeite. Now these are jadeite haigus. It doesn't matter what the hole is in the side of the donut, you can still replicate the demonstration that I'm going to show you here. And again, there can be different thicknesses, different gauges, but they all have the same connection, and that's what I'm about to show you next. Okay, so I'm going to go for the tiger's eye. It's one of my favourites. And I'm going to use this colour cord. I think that matches beautifully. This is the joy of jewellery making. You can just have a real play and experiment with colour and texture before you even start the project. I'm going to incorporate some 8/0 seed beads, so I'm going to go for the green. So I think that gives a really nice autumnal edge to it. Now we will be using T-pins. So on JewelleryMaker, we provide packs of 35, I believe, so it's well worth getting a pack of at least 35. We're going to be making a bracelet in the final chapter, which does use a lot of your T-pins, so it's definitely worth investing in your T-pins. So let's get started. So I'm going to show you first of all how we attach our donut to our macrame board. So first of all, we need to decide how many cords we're going to use. So for the demonstration, I'm going to use 3 sets of cord. So for example, if you were making a necklace, you would have a set of cords going to the right of the neckline, a set of cords going to the left. You don't have to, but I like to have a corded tassel to make a feature of the center of your piece of work. If you're making a bracelet, replicate the demonstration I'm going to show you, but you'd only use each side of your cabochon, of your donut in the center. So I'm just going to make one side and then you can replicate it how you will in your particular design. So you've got our donut. I'm going to take my 3 cords and I'm going to, let's go for 3 feet in length. But as I said, it's all about experimenting. The point of these tutorials is to give you the knowledge to learn the technique, and then you can go away and experiment with length, color, texture, etc. afterwards. So I have my 3 cords. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to attach our cords. Now, do you remember I said in the introduction that the lark's head knot is generally only used for attaching cords to gemstones? Well, this is it in a prime example. So I'm going to take my cord, I've folded it in half, I'm going to feed it underneath the donut coming up through the center, and I'm going to bring the 2 ends up through the loop I've just made, okay? So this is a lark's head. Now I'm just going to show you, that is the back of the lark's head. We have the cords coming from within the loop. If I flip it over, this is the front, and you can see that the cords go through the loop. Can you see there's a raised bridge with the cords going through? This is the top of the lark's head knot, that's the back. What I tend to do is attach my cords from the back and then flip my work over to start my piece of work. So I'm going to take my second cord, I'm going to take it, fold it in half, there's my loop, I'm going to fold that through the donut, pull the loop through, grab the 2 cords, pull them through, that's the second, pull them nice and tight, and then I'm going to take my 3rd cord, fold it in half, make the loop, pass it into the center of the donut, pull the loop through, feed the 2 tails through, pulling nice and tight. So there we have our 3 lark's heads. That's the back of the 3 and that's the front. So you can definitely see a difference. We've got the raised loops at the front and we've got the loops within the cords at the back. Okay, so if I was making a necklace, I would have 3 for the tassel section, the drop at the front, for the decorative feature, and then I would repeat the 3 sets of cords going up either side of the necklace. So what we're going to do is we're going to incorporate the lark's head knot with your half hitch and double half hitch knots in this particular demonstration. So we've got our donut, so we need to secure it into place. So I just tend to pop in a T-pin just to secure it in position, and then a T-pin to the right, and then a T-pin to the left just to keep it nice and secure like so. Okay, so that's now nice and tight. So what we're going to do is we're going to join the cords together with some half hitch and double half hitch. Now this is also known as Cavendoli knotting, if you hear Cavendoli knotting mentioned. So one of these cords is going to be called the holding cord, and the other 5 are going to be tying the half hitch and the double half hitch knots. So I tend to start on the left-hand side of my work. No rhyme or reason, it's just something that I've always done, so it's the best way to stick to. But if you find it easier starting on the right-hand side, maybe you're left-handed and you work right to left, that might be the case. So I'm going to take my first set of 2 cords, I'm going to separate them, and I'm going to place a T-pin, make sure they're nice and secure. I'm going to place a T-pin within the first 2 cords, and I'm going to take my cord across and pop it in a slot on the right hand side of the board. And then I'm going to take my 5 remaining cords and I'm going to pop them just for this round in individual slots along the bottom. We won't be using the slots once we've done the first couple of rows, and I'll explain why when we come to do the next section. Make sure it's nice and secure. Okay, so we have our 5 cords along the bottom in slots. We've got our holding cord pinned into position, veering off to the right. So as I said, this is the holding cord, and this holding cord, all it will do, it will snake left and right, left, right, left, right, all the way down from your center point up here. So first of all, we're going to tie a half hitch knot. Once we've tied our half hitch, we will then tie our double half hitch knots. So as I mentioned earlier, you will be using a lot of T-pins in this demonstration. So first of all, we're going to do our half hitch. So I'm going to pick up my left hand cord. I'm going to drape it over the top of the holding, come down underneath it, take hold of the cord and pull it nice and tightly towards the T-pin. So that's now nice and secure in position. You can pop that cord out of the way. We're going to pick up our next cord in the row, take the cord over the horizontal, underneath, pull nice and tight. I like to give it a little nudge with my index finger. And then we're going to take our next cord over the top, down and pull to the left, give it a little nudge. Then we're going to take our fourth cord, making sure that you bring your 3 knotted sections nice and tight to your donut. Over the top, down, pull to the left. And then we're going to take our 5th cord, over the top, down, pull to the left. So nice and secure. So now we have a row of half hitch knots, and you can see now that the cords are nicely separated on their own, so you don't need the slots at the bottom. It was only for that first row. So what we're going to do now, and we're going to do this after every row, is we're going to pick up a T-pin and we're going to place it in the middle of that right angle. So there's our holding cord, here's our set of working cords. So I'm going to take the T-pin and I'm going to place it in that right angle. I'm going to lift up our holding cord because it's done its job for this row. I'm going to swing it across and place it in the next available slot on the left hand side. And what we're going to do now is we've done a row of half hitch and we're going to do a row of double half hitch now, so you'll see the difference. When we come to tie our knots with our working cords, we always start at the T-pin side that we've just added. So I'm going to pick up my first cord and I'm going to go over the top, down, underneath the working cord, the holding cord, pull once to the right, nice and tight. Don't let go of that cord, repeat the knot. So over the top of the holding, down, pull to the right. So that's your first double half hitch. So from now until the very end of your bracelet or your necklace or your piece of work, we will be focusing on the double half hitches. Then we're going to pick up the next cord in the row, over the top, under, once, pull, over the top, under, pull to the right. That's our second double. Then we're going to take our third cord, over the top, down, to the right, second half, over the top, down, to the right. Make sure it's nice, and again, I give it a little nudge with my index finger. Then we're going to take our fourth cord. And it's really important when you do your first and second rows that you don't cross over your cords, which I think I'm all right at the moment. So we go over the top, down, to the right, over the top, down, to the right, and we pull across nice and tight. And now we're coming to do our last cord. So over the top and down, to the right, give it a little nudge, over the top, down, to the right, give it a little nudge. So now when I bring my 5 cords down, you can definitely see a space in between. They're nice and separated. And we've already started to get our design. So what we're going to do, we're going to repeat, we're going to pick up a T-pin, we're going to place it inside that right angle, and to place our pin in nice and securely. We're going to pick up the holding cord, and as I mentioned, the holding cord, all it does, it holds the working and it'll be meandering throughout your piece of work. We're going to take our cord and we're going to take it across. Now you can see on the right hand side, my cord is in between the 2 slots. If I go up, the knots are going to go uphill. If I go a slot down, the knots are going to go downhill. So what I like to do is I like to place my cord, this is a little top tip, place my cord halfway along, take a T-pin, place it in the board, wind the cord once and then take that end and place it in a slot at the bottom of your board. So then that's nice and straight, nicely horizontal. We can start tying our next row. Always start where the T-pin was popped in. So I'm going to pick up my first cord. So it's double half hitch, so that's our first and our second. Pop the cord to the left, then we pick up our next. Over the top and down, over the top and down. Pick up our next cord, over the top and down, over the top and down. Then number 5, and you can now clearly see the gap in between the cords, so there's no mistaking which cord is overlapping. So just make sure we don't get our T-pins caught. So over the top and down, over the top and down, and then I'm going to take my 5th and final cord over the top, down, over the top and down. So make sure that's nice and secure. So you can already start to see now we've got this meandering of the half hitch knotting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to incorporate some seed beads in these 5 working threads. So I'm going to pick up my 8 O's and I'm going to pop 1 8O on each of the 5 working cords. I'm not going to touch the holding cord. So I'm just going to pick up each of the cords and I'm going to thread on an 8O seed bead. So I'm going to slide that down so it reaches the bottom, then pick up the next, pick up 1 8O, slide it through. Now if you were doing this with 0.5mm E-Lon cord, you could get away with using 11O seed beads, but because I'm using a thicker cord, I've gone up to an 8O where the drill hole are slightly larger. Make sure I don't get mixed up. I'm going to keep feeding these on. Now for the beginning of this piece of work I would pop 1 seed bead on each of the cords, and you can, if you want to, add 2, add 3 if you wanted a bigger feature. So as you can see, I'm just going to slide those seed beads up so they sit in a nice neat row. And then what we're going to do is we're going to release our holding cord. Before we let go, we're going to take our pin and we're going to place it in the right angle. And then we're going to swing our cord around. Now don't be worried if the seed beads disappear underneath, we'll pop them back into position in a while. And then what we're going to do then, we need to capture our seed beads. So we're going to take our first cord and we're going to go over the top, down, and just make sure that that little seed bead sits underneath that cord. And then once we come to do the second, that will hold it nice and neatly in position. Just give it a little nudge with your finger. Then we're going to pick up the second cord, over, down, pull. So you can now see the beads are nicely positioned in between the cords. Feed that down. Bring this up nice and tight. Then we're going to do our next. So over the top, down to the right, over the top, down to the right. Make sure it sits nice and neatly. Then we're going to pick up our next, making sure we don't cross our cords. Sits nice and neatly in position. And then we're going to do our last section. And down. So we've got a nice and neat section of our 8 O's. Once we come to take this off the board, which we will do shortly, those seed beads will sit nice and neatly in position. So I like to do 2 rows in between my beads. So we're going to pick up another T-pin, going to place it in the center of the right angle, nice and secure. Then we're going to pick up our holding cord and we're going to go across to the right, and it's a perfect position for a slot. So we can pop that straight in the slot And then we can do our next row of half hitches. So we're starting on the left, over the top and down, nicely pulling tight, over the top and down, nice and give it a little nudge, over the top and down, over the top and down, give it a nudge. Then we're going to do the third, there are many tutorials out there who will show you how to do this technique without the T-pins, but I find that for me it's a lot easier and much easier to control your threads and the tension with the knots from using the T-pins and the macrame board. So it's entirely up to the individual's preference, but I think you get a nicer, neat gauge on here. Now in the next section I'm going to show you how to introduce gemstones. So you can introduce gemstones at this point if you want to. And to finish, what we would do is we would continue with our design, and I'll show you some designs in a moment. But when we finished our double half hitch, and to finish, I like to have a mirror image, so I like to revert back to the single half hitch. So it finishes exactly the same way. So I'm going to take my T-pin, again, in the middle of the right angle, place that down. I'm going to take my holding cord and swing it round into the slot. So what we're going to do is we're going to revert back to a single half hitch, not a double now. So I'm going to take my right hand cord over the top and down, pulling once, pick up the next, over the top and down twice, then our cord number 3, over the top, down once, over the top, down once, over the top, down once. So now we're back down to our single half hitches. And then what we can do to finish this little section here is we can finish with a bit of square knot. So I'm going to again take a T-pin, pop it in the right angle, and I'm going to pick up the left hand cord, which is the holding that we've been working with, and then I'm going to pick up the right cord, place the 4 cords that you have left into the slot at the bottom of our board, which is nice and secure, and then we're going to tie some square knots, and this will just bring your beading together. So do the left side first, and it gives it a nice little cinch, then the right, and then the left, and the right, so obviously I've just shown you a little section of this particular technique. When you've watched the final chapter, which we're about to come to, you can incorporate your lark's head, your half hitch, your double half hitch, your square knot, incorporating gemstones and seed beads. So everything we've shown you in the past 2 tutorials on the JM Academy, plus what we've learnt today, the world is your oyster as far as macrame goes. Okay, so if this was a necklace side of your donut, for example, going up to the left shoulder or the right shoulder, you would continue with your macrame, or you would do plaiting, entirely up to you. But this is the best bit. This brings out the inner nerd in me. I love taking the pins out of my project at the end. So all we're going to do is just going to gently pull the pins out all the way around. And as you can see, we've only done a little inch section, and we've already used a lot of our T-pins. So pull those out, and as you can see, we've got a beautiful piece of beaded macrame, and you have a distinct back to your work, and you definitely have a distinct front. And you can see the holding cord has done its stuff with the meandering. We've popped in the seed beads there beautifully. They all sit in nice and neatly, and then we've declined the sizes all the way down to the half hitch, and then we've incorporated the square knot macrame. So in this little piece of work here, we've actually included the lark's head, the half hitch, the double half hitch, and the square and the half square knot in your macrame. So in fact, in that tiny section, we've used 5 of our macrame knots all in one. It's absolutely beautiful. So if I just bring this piece of jewellery across to show you on here, this is beautiful. I love this piece of jewellery. And again, this is using the tiger's eye. So I've used a thinner cord this time. I've used 0.5 and I've made a little section here without the seed bead. So starting with your half hitch and then your double, and then I've made a length of square knot macrame and I've finished with a clasp that end. I've gone a bit asymmetric. So I've made again, our little double half hitch section. Then I've separated the cords into 3 and I've done a bit of twist macrame with some beautiful tiger's eye gemstones working up to here. I've stopped. Then I've made a longer section and an even longer section so you get that graduated bib style necklace. And then once I've got all my cords back together again, I've placed them with pins in my macrame board. I've chosen one as my holding, and then I've meandered, incorporating it into the macrame, and then I've altered back onto square knot macrame and finished with the holding clasp at the end. So once again, this is incorporating all 5 of our macrame knots. Now, one of my favourite techniques, and you've already had a little sneaky peek of it, is the gate bracelet, which is what we're going to be covering next. And this will incorporate all of your knots, your 5 knots, including your lark's head. And this time we're going to be incorporating gemstones in our macrame square knot caging. And again, this is incorporating all of our gemstones. So without further ado, come along and join me in chapter 5, the final chapter. Welcome back to chapter 5, the final chapter. And as the title of the JewelleryMaker Academy suggests, this is all about multi-knot macrame. Now, we've learnt all of the knots throughout this tutorial. We've learnt our loop lock, we've learnt half and double half hitch, and our half square and our square knot. And there's only one left to do, including with all these, and that's to be adding gemstones in our square knot caging. And the piece of work that exemplifies this better than any is this bracelet I've got here. And I've called this the Macramé Cage Bracelet. So you can see we start at the top with our loop lock loop. Then we have our half hitch and double half hitch meandering. This is the caging, which we're going to learn next. And in between, we've got our double half hitch holding cord meandering, as we did in the previous chapter. And then we finish with a little bit of half hitch and double half hitch, a bit of macrame, which I'm going to show you at the beginning of the piece, and then we've got our gemstone at the end. And the gemstone that I've chosen is a 6mm round, and this is red tiger's eye. Again, before you start any of your projects, just check that the cord gauge that you use will fit through the drill holes of the tiger's eye, and you generally find that your 0.9 will go through all of your tiger's eye, all of your quartz, your agates, your jaspers. Any gemstone that's quite prevalent in the world will have a much larger drill hole. So I'm going to use the tiger's eye. So where to begin? We need a lot of cords for this one. So I have 4 pieces of 0.9 E-Lon, and in this I'm using a beautiful mushroom taupe beige colour. And each of these will need to be approximately between 4 and 5 feet long. Okay. So that's 120 to 150 centimetres. Take your cords, fold them in half, place your 4 cords in the centre of your board with your index finger, and place all 4 cords through one slot at the top of your board. Bring them down and place in a slot in the bottom of your board. So we have your 4 cords. And again, if you can, try to have them running parallel, not overlapping. Now we take our 5th cord, and this is exactly the same colour. You can use alternating colours if you want to. All 5 can be different colours if you'd rather. And we're going to do what we did right back in chapter 2 when we did our first loop lock. I'm going to take our piece of cord, I'm going to fold it in half, and in the centre of our board I'm going to feed the loop underneath. Okay, but because we're working with 3 rows of gemstones, we need 9 cords. So if I use 2 plus the 8, that's 10, one of the cords is going to be wasted. So what we're going to do is we're going to revert back to how we attached our bracelet right at the very beginning in chapter 2 when we did our lark's head bracelet. Is we're going to go to one end and we're going to fold in half, this time about 15 to 20 centimeters, like so. We're going to place our loop underneath and we're going to catch our 2 cords like so. So I'm just going to secure my cords on my board nice and tight, like so. So we've got our first knot, and just roughly place it in the center. Your shorter cord, take out of the way, so just place that up at the top, and then we're going to do a series of our knots to make our loop lock finding. So we all know how to do this now. I'm so pleased that we've brought all of your attention to the lovely lark's head knot. It definitely deserves its place in the macrame world, and I think we've certainly done it justice in our tutorials today. So we're going to go and do our set of 12. So over and under, pull up, under and over and under, pull up. We'll all definitely be experts at the lark's head today. So we're just coming up to do our 6th. That's 7. 8. 9. 10. So do 2 more. And then our last one. So that's our 12. Obviously, if you're using a smaller gemstone, you don't need to do as many knots. If you're using a larger, you'll need to add a few more. Okay, so we've got our nice row of our lark's head knots. So we're going to take our work off the board. And as I said, there are quite a few cords at this point. And we're going to fold our loop into a nice loop shape, and always make sure that your working threads that you've just tied your lark's heads with are on the outside, not the inside. So we're going to fold that in half. We're going to squidge the 2 ends together, place it at the top of our macrame board, and again we're going to use a T-pin, but we're not going to not put our pin through the loop, we're just going to secure it. Place all of our cords in the bottom of our board, and then we're going to bring the 2 cords together, include one. Remember, one will be shorter than the other, and we're going to tie 3 square knots, which will then bring our nice little loop nice and tight together. So that's our lark's head, and now we're doing our full square knot. So that's 2. Let's just do 1 more. You can do as many of these knots as you like. I like to do, if I can, a minimum of 2 or 3. And you need to make sure that when you do your final bit of knotting, that your longer cord, which will be your meandering holding cord, is on the left-hand side. So I'm going to now, we don't need to this piece of cord anymore. So I'm just, for safety reasons, I don't want it all falling apart. I'm just going to place it in my macrame board out of the way until we get to the end when we can secure it all together. So we've got our loop lock and we've placed our little cord out of the way. So now we have left 9 cords. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to separate our cords into 3 sets of 3. And try if you can to get the cords that are near each other. So that's 3. Then we've got, so just spend a good couple of seconds just separating your cords, making sure they're adjoining or adjacent to each other, which those 3 are. So now we have 3 sets of 3. So I'm going to work with the middle set first of all. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the middle of the 3 cords from that middle section, and I'm going to tie a square knot. So back to our square knots again. And I'm just going to bring that knot up to the top. So that's our first knot, and then I'm going to tie a second. So that's 2 square knots. Just place those loosely in the bottom of our board. Then I'm going to take the next set of 3, find the center, and bear in mind that one there's going to be the holding cord, so that will need to be on the left hand side. So I'm going to tie 2 square knots with the holding cord and the cord from our work. So that's 1 and 2. So that's the left hand side, that's the right hand side. Like so. Place that in a slot in the bottom, and then we're going to do the same with our right hand group of 3. So 1, 2, find the central cord, place it in a slot at the bottom, and then tie a square knot twice around that central cord. So 1 and 2. That's your first square knot. Each square knot always has a left and a right side. Left and a right. Pull that through. So now when you pull the 3 sets of cords apart, you have one group of 2 square knots. You have a group of 3 square knots in the center and a group of 2 square knots on the left. Okay, so all this does is it separates our cord, because we need to have a wider bracelet band than we did when we did our previous demonstration. So we're going to place all of our cords down the board, and now we can start doing our half hitches. So we've got our 3 groups of macrame. This is our holding cord, so this will be slightly longer than our other cords. Now we already know that we place our pin in the right angle. We're going to take our cord, our holding cord, we're going to swing it round to the right. As you remember, I always work from the left to the right for the first one. Pop it in a slot. Now, because our macrame knots have separated our cords, as you can see there's quite a gap in between, we don't need to do our half hitch and then our double half hitch. We can go straight into our double, which will save a bit of time at the beginning. So we're going to start nearest the pin, over the top, down to the left, over the top, down to the left. Then we take our next cord, making sure we don't twist them, over the top, down to the left, over the top, down to the left. Give it a little squidge with your index finger. Then our next. Over the top. And then our next. Just be patient at this point, because we don't want to twist or cross over our cords, because you will definitely notice. Then we'll take our next cord, which was going to be this one. There we go. So just take that little extra bit of time. So down to the left, down to the left. Then we take our next, down to the left, down to the left. Then we'll take our next cord. Once we've done our first row of half hitch, everything will settle down nice and neatly. and we'll have a better idea of where we're going with it. Perfect. So you can now see that we've got our first row of double half hitches. So what I'd recommend that you do is as we did in the previous demonstration, is we're going to pop a pin in, we're going to swing round, we're going to do a row of double half hitches. We're going to put in a pin, we're going to meander across, and we're going to do another. So we want 3 rows of double half hitches, okay? So for demonstration purposes, I'm going to stop here and show you the next stage. So we've done our row, we've done our second row, we've done our third row. So now what we're going to do is start to incorporate our gemstones, and we're going to do some macrame caging. So I've got, as I mentioned, my beautiful strand of red tiger's eye with really good drill holes. So what we're going to do again is we've got 9 cords, and you need 3 cords to do a set of macrame. So I'm going to take the far left cords, I'm going to take the 3 middle cords, I'm going to take the 2 left plus the holding cord, the meandering cord, and that's going to become the third set. So we're just going to separate them into groups of 3 as we did at the beginning. I'm going to take my middle set, I'm going to take the middle cord of the 3, and I'm going to thread on 3 tiger's eye. So 1, 2, and 3. Place that up to the top, pop my cord in the middle slot on the bottom, and what we're going to do is I'm going to take the first gemstone up so it sits underneath the half hitch row, and I'm going to do a square knot which will cage the tiger's eye. So make sure it's nice and secure, like so, and then I'm going to feed up the second gemstone and I'm going to cage that. Now caging is basically tying a square knot around an obstacle, and the obstacle being the gemstone on the cord. So that's 1, 2, and then the third gemstone will just sit uncaged underneath. Pop the cords in the slot out of the way, and then we're going to move on to the left set of 3 cords. Separate them, and the middle of the 3 we're going to pop on our 3 tiger's eye. So 1, 2, and 3. We're going to slide those up. We're going to cage the first one. Making sure it sits alongside its partner, which it does perfectly. Then we're going to slide up the next gemstone. Cage it nice and neatly. If you find that your cord does move away from the centre, just give it a little nudge and it'll pop into position. Then we're going to pop up our third. Then we're going to work on our last set of 3. Now don't take the T-pin out when you come to do your holding cord. So we're going to take the middle of the 3, leave the holding cord in position at the moment, thread on our 3 gemstones, 1, 2, and 3. We're going to slide those up, place your cord in a slot on the bottom, and while you keep that T-pin in, remove your winding cord, your holding cord, move your gemstones down, pop the first gemstone up, and we're going to cage it, but keep the pin in position. So we're going to slide that up, cage it in position. So the T-pin doesn't actually impede too much on the caging. Just move those cords out of the way a bit. There we go. So I've done the left side of the knot. I'm going to do the right side. So that's caged that. Then we're going to slide the next one. Cage that underneath. Then we're going to do our third, like so. Then we're going to slide our gemstone up. Now this cord here on the right is still our holding cord. So as soon as we've done that, we're going to place our right T-pin in position. We're going to let all our gemstones into place, and we're going to replace our cords at the bottom of the board. Once we've got our T-pin in position here, We're going to take the cord, we're going to swing it round, pop in another T-pin directly underneath. Can you see I'm caging the bead with 2 T-pins? The cord goes across into the slot. Once you've got your macrame beads in position, we start from right to left. Always start your double half hitches where your T-pin is, and we begin our next row of half hitches. So 1 and 2, give a nudge. We're just going to get the rest of our cords. So we've got our next cord, nearly twisted it then. Look, you have to be so careful when you do your first row. Pull nice and tight. That's our second, and this will hold that macrame section beautifully into position. Over the top and down, pull to the right, give a little nudge, over the top, down to the right, then we'll do our next, pull to the right, pull to the right, then we'll take our next cord, which is this one here, over, down, give a nudge, over, down, give a little nudge, then we'll take our next cord, over the top and down, over the top and down, pulling nice and tight. We've got 2 left. Down and to the right, give a little nudge, and then we'll do our last double half hitch of this row. And 2. And then you can now see that those macrame caged beads are nicely locked into position. So what you would do then is you would take another T-pin, you would put it in position in that right angle, you'd bring your holding cord across, you tie another row, and then another row. So you'd have 3 rows in between your macrame sections. So what I've got, which I'll just bring across now, is a piece of work that's a bit further on, and you can see exactly what I mean. So we've got, these are all my cords. I'll just move my cords down. I hooked them up to keep them nice and secure. There we go. So you can see now that we've already got 3 sections. Now I find for a 7-inch bracelet, including the loop lock and your gemstone, will need 3 groups of your macrame with 3 rows of double half hitches in between, which I've done here. So imagine that we've made our 3 sections. We're going to find our holding cord. So you can always tell which is your holding cord because you can see the bend. So I've started here with my holding cord. I've gone lost to the left, and then you can see there's a distinct turn. I've gone to the right. There's a distinct turn. I've gone to the left. So I know that that left cord will be my holding cord. Okay, so put that to one side. We're going to pop in a T-pin underneath that last gemstone on that row. We're going to take our cord around into a slot, and then we're going to do our double row of hitches. Remember, always start where the pin, and we're going to do our double row. So 1 and then 2, nice and secure. Then we're going to take our next, over the top to the left, over the top to the left, then our next. And every time you do a row of these double half hitches, it just secures everything in position, and it's an absolutely beautiful technique. And as I said, remember when we did our little section on donuts, you can start with your donut in the center, and you can do 3 of these sections, make a very, very dramatic statement piece of jewellery. So we've managed to incorporate all of the knots in this particular piece of work, and if you include the lark's head with your donut, or you start with a lark's head loop lock ending, it's such a joy to incorporate all of the knots that we've used and not just settle on your square knot, which a lot of people tend to do to make their beaded shambhala macrame bracelets. So it's lovely to do it like this. Okay, so do our final knot. like so. So we've got our group of knots at the bottom, and then do you remember right at the top we did our 3 rows with our little macrame section. Now I like to replicate the start exactly the same as the finish. So what we're going to do next is we're going to imagine that this along the bottom here we now have 3 rows of our double half hitch. So we always pop in a pin, and then we're going to separate our cords into 3 sets of 3. Remember, don't take out the pin that's holding your holding cord. And we're going to tie 2, do you remember we did 2 square knots at the beginning of our piece of work, so we always replicate a mirror image. So we're going to do our 1, so that's our first square knot. Then we're going to do our second, then we're going to do the same with the other 2 sets. So we've got our left hand set. Going to tie our first square knot. Now I always start the left side followed by the right, depending on if you're left or right handed will determine which side you start with, but as long as you do that same combination for every single one of your knots throughout your piece of work, otherwise the cords won't line. That's the second set, and then we'll come to our third and final set. Keep the T-pin in position until we've finished. We're going to lift the holding cord, but we're going to keep the pin. We're going to tie our 2 square knots around the pin. There we go. Like so. So that's 1, and then 2. Like so. Now we started at the top of our bracelet with our Lark's head loop knot. Okay, obviously we're not going to finish with another of those at the bottom. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the inner 7 cords and we're going to place them into 1 slot in the bottom of our board. And then what we're going to do is we're going to bring those 3 square knots together using the outside 2 cords. So we're going to tie a square knot. Can you see it brings them nice and neatly to a beautiful point at finish. And then we're going to tie another. So the first knot's come undone slightly, so just pull it in and then gently pull the second half of the knot, and you can see now that'll bring it all nice and neatly together. So we're going to tie our second. So I would definitely recommend tying 3. Do you remember we did 3 knots at the beginning of our bracelet? So I always try to do mirror images if I can. Like so. And then to finish, we need to take it off of our board. And as in the previous chapter, the best bit is taking the pins off. So we're just going to go in and gently pull out the pins all the way along our piece of work. There's something quite exhilarating about releasing your piece of jewellery from the board. Okay, so we'll take that off our board completely. We don't need our board again. So this is what our, obviously we would add another 2 more sections if we were making this at home. So first of all we're going to cut our cord at the top and then apply your naked flame or a little dab of glue. And then what I would do then is do the same with our working cords. So I'm just going to cut off the 2 outer edges. And then I'm going to, one by one, cut away our cords, leaving the central cord. So just have a little peruse. That seems to be the central one. So I'm going to cut away the 3 on the right-hand side. And I'll go in and tidy those up a bit later on with my naked flame. Then I'm going to cut away the 3 from the left, which will leave our single cord running through the center. And for that, I will add one of our tiger's eye. Slide that down, tie an overhand knot, which will then secure our work. Slide the knot down. It doesn't have to be butting up completely against it. You need a bit of wiggle room for the clasp. So I'm just going to pop that in like so, and then leave a little tail to aid pulling through the loop. So if I quickly show, that's the front of your bracelet, and then I'll show you the back. It looks completely different. You get a herringbone pattern on the back. You can wear it on the back, it's completely reversible, but I just wanted to show you how different the back and the front looks. And you can definitely see the snake meander through the work from start to the finish. And then all we would do then is if I just cut off those escaped threads, and then you would have your gemstone pull through your loop lock nice and securely, and there you have your completed multi-knot. You've used every single of the 5 macrame knots in this piece of jewellery. Absolutely beautiful, not a finding in sight, all made with cord and gemstones, so a completely natural finish to your work completed. And I'm really thrilled that we've used all of the 5 knots in macrame. Absolutely amazing, absolutely amazing. So I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you've learned now how to incorporate all of your incredible knots and your gemstones in your work. So that's it for today's tutorials. I hope you've enjoyed it, and make sure that you go onto the website, onto the JewelleryMaker Academy site, and have a look and see what's coming up. There's bound to be something more about macrame coming up from me. Thank you ever so much for joining me. My name's been Mark Smith. You've been an absolute joy to teach, and I hope to see you again soon.